to talk about Mozart as being the creator of an original piece of music, he would have borrowed some ideas from somewhere to create his music. I mean, all music is derivative of something or other.
That's ridiculous.
Sylvie, you going to come to Tony's defense?
Mozart didn't create an original piece of music.
Victoria, if we move the conversation away from individuals and we focus less on individual agency, what does that mean when we're talking about things like politics and freedom? Because presumably all of us in this room operate on individual human agency. Does the institutional, sociological, historical view lead to a kind of hopelessness, a kind of apathy, a kind of pointlessness? Why are we doing anything?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really speak, in the same way as Sylvie or even Tony so much about kind of how to affect a cultural, sociological movement. It's not really my area. I focus more on sort of what does it mean to be a human person. And I actually think I would push back on Sylvie and say, at least from my more metaphysical perspective, and say that actually maybe what is needed more than anything is a renaissance of individuality, but not an individuality where you're sort of the sum total of consumerist desires, which is, how in our late stage capitalist society, the individual is made to express his or herself, or allowed to, within this kind of very limited and superficial selfhood. I think that there's layers to the self. There's deep layers to the self. And the self is like a deep well or pond. And there's sort of these dead leaves on the surface of the pond, which consists in all of our kind of superficial actions and behaviors, and largely influenced by or tailored to the people who are immediately around us or the trends that we're immediately trying to satisfy. But the more you peer beneath that surface, the more you see that there's a real depth and profundity to the self. And I think that if anything, what will help us to navigate this world of AI and the increasing impersonality that's occurring behind, basically all of our written text we're reading, as well as, various companies. I don't know, our whole society is moving towards this impersonal kind of monolithic, monoculture AI text where everything kind of sounds the same and everything has the same idea. And I think really the way that we can rescue ourselves from that rather dystopian vision is by rescuing the sense of creativity that surges up from the bottom of that well and pours itself out onto the world. So I would argue for a restoration of individuality.
Yes, you're very welcome to do you feel as though there is any aspect of that, the self, the leaves in the water, which is unconstructed?
That the deep...
By our environment, by our culture, by the history that's come to now.
The deep layer?
The deep layer.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a metaphysical construction to it, right? I mean, there's a sort of structure to the mind. There are certain kind of laws of the mind, and I really don't want to sound too Kantian about it, but we can think, we do think, we're alive, we know that we're alive, we love, we desire, we will, we remember, we create. Those are all features, a pattern of the human mind, and there is a kind of pattern that we all belong to. And our individual lives, even our great course of our life, which sort of swells between tragedy and misery and triumph and great joys, and this oscillation of what it is to be a human person. I mean, there's something about each individual story which does map onto this kind of eternal plan of humanity and who the human being is fundamentally as a person. So there's a metaphysical construction, you might say, but I think I don't know, I think it's always in dialogue and dialectic, that deeper part of ourself with the more socio-cultural constructed world around us. And I do think that there's a real willing there at the heart of each individual person that is truly unique.
Tony, how can we motivate ourselves to actions if we do view everything from this God's eye sociological view? If we see ourselves as tiny little grains of sand on this whopping beach, how can we be motivated to do anything?
I'm going to have to stick and repeat myself a little bit here about understanding that we are subjects that arise from atmospheres and moods. I think the idea of kind of rescuing the self from that is misunderstands. I mean, overestimates the nature of self, the nature of subjectivity and how it arises. and I think it underestimates that. We are plugged into collectivities. Again, returning to Gabriel Tard, he wrote a book in the late 1800s called The Society of Imitation. In a quite insightful way, which has been repeated a little bit in neuroscience in the last sort of couple of decades, that there are these biological inclinations to kind of copy and repeat. And Sylvie mentioned habit, sort of things that you might vote a certain way because your family voted that way. Things that are ingrained in you over the years, which you can crudely call like a copy. I'm not talking about. I'm talking about imitation. It's a lot more kind of fine-grained than just copy paste. But to understand that we're in that, I think it's not so much about rescuing ourselves from that environment. It's about thinking about how we can rewire that environment, or regulate that environment, or change it and take it away from certain people who have monopolies over the control of it. I think we're in an era where experience is writ large. You hear about the experience economy. You hear about the user experience. We're all fine grains of sand. We're all actually fine users, tiny little users in a huge wired up network. But those networks are operated by one or two individuals, one or two companies, mainly all in Silicon Valley. So I think we're in a fundamental time of a struggle for experience. You might call it a struggle for user experience. So I think that's where the debate needs to go. We can talk about rescuing ourselves as philosophical individuals, but I think those networks are a lot more important at the moment.
Wait, can I just ask one question though? How does genuine creative genius arise then in your case? If everything is just, if the self just emerges from this impersonal network of forces, then how do you explain a Mozart? How do you explain a Beethoven? How do you explain a Shakespeare?
Well, not by creative genius. Funny enough, I was in Hay yesterday and I bought a book on Kandinsky. And it starts by saying Kandinsky was famous because he was the first person to produce an abstract painting. And it says, well, of course he wasn't, because he was part of an art group which lots of people were painting with him. He was just the most famous one. To talk about Mozart as being the creator of an original piece of music, he would have borrowed some ideas from somewhere to create his music. I mean, all music is derivative of something or other.
That's ridiculous.
Sylvie, are you going to come to Tony's defense?
Mozart didn't create an original piece of music.
I'm siding with Victoria here, but with a perhaps a different spin that's perhaps deflates a little bit of the I don't know, but
tension.
I'd like to consider what does it mean, to rescue the self. Right, it's an interesting question, and one thing that I'm fascinated by personally, and maybe that's me. But Victoria, please tell me. I'm fascinated by this possibility of always again becoming different from who you already are, right? So this idea is more than, there's the idea of self-transformation as a capacity, but some people often ask me then, but Sylvie, why are you so fascinated with the possibility of transformation? You could be very happy with who you are, and that doesn't make you a subpar human being. And I'm like, no, I'm not trying to say that you're a subpar human being if you don't want to transform yourself. But what I'm really concerned about, and it's been made vivid because I've spent a lot of time trying to get a hold of this idea of what kind of manipulation are social media affecting on us. And I was part of this big workshop with the best minds of manipulation, and we spent 2 days talking about manipulation, and after 2 days we still didn't get a very good test for actually what's happening when social media basically affect everything, your social circles, the way you think, what you like, etc. What's problematic, and what are we trying to capture as problematic when we talk about manipulation? And one of the things that I'm really intrigued by is that perhaps we've crossed a line that shouldn't be crossed when people end up so utterly optimized around the profile that's been made of them. Like, let's say you've been sold a burglar alarm, right? And then your social media feeds you lots of burglaries, you recommended friends who are really security conscious. As a result, you join Neighborhood Watch, you're very proud of who you've become, right? You've become a very security conscious person. Okay. Now, if I tell you 3 years later, hey, actually, you've become all this, because of a social media campaign to sell you burglar alarms. Now, what if you tell me, no, but I'm very proud of who I've become? Who am I to say to you, no, but it's wrong. You've been manipulated. It's really wrong. If you tell me, no, but I'm proud of it. And so one thing that we will struggle to articulate is what has gone wrong. What is the moral wrong here? And to me, the moral wrong is when you've lost the ability to again becoming different from, for instance, that super security conscious self. So it's a bit like joining a cult, where what can happen is that alternative modes of being, of transforming, of becoming, as you were saying, become out of reach. And so it's not wholly about the individual, it's not wholly about the environment, it's about the relationship between the two.
You said Tony's point was ridiculous, but what's your alternative? That there is a kind of Mozart essence, that there is a Newtonian soul, or some kind of core to Newton that was given at birth?
Well, I mean, in a way, yes. I mean, I really think that those are real individuals, yeah, in some irreducible fundamental sense. But also, I think that there's genuine novelty in the world. I think that there are things that happen that are not contained in the antecedents. You can't add up together the causes and get the effect. And especially the prime case of that is the case of human creativity and human artistic invention, really. And when you see something like, how Shakespeare writes Hamlet, I mean, you can only look back after it's been written and say, okay, well, Shakespeare had some idea of Hamlet that then he worked out. It's like, well, no, it actually took him that process of writing that in turn created the character and created the play. And you can't actually treat it like a mathematical calculation, unlike, for example, really basic phenomena in physics, which you can easily add up together some causes and look at their effects, and it's a largely deterministic framework. I think the framework of human creativity, and I guess by extension human individuality, is not a deterministic framework. I mean, I think we have free will as individuals, and I think that each of us, in many ways, is like the artist and the work with respect to our own lives that we live in time.
I mean, it's nature of the beast a little bit, because we're talking about counterfactuals, what would happen if Shakespeare were not to have been born. But isn't your position inherently unfalsifiable? There is nothing we can, is it a position of faith rather than actually the data available to us about the world?
I think it's the burden of proof is on those who tell me that, a Mozart symphony is just a recombination of existing elements, to show me that that's the case. I think they would have to prove to me that the act of creation isn't an act of irreducible novelty.
But Tony did that with the book. It says that he was standing on the shoulders of giants. That there were people before Mozart, or who was it you mentioned? Kandinsky, who had done similar things, variations on it.
I mean, but people do similar things, but each time you put your soul into something and create it, what you're doing in that act is you're creating something that's more than just there in the parts. And the act itself produces something that's irreducibly new.
I think the disagreement here, I believe in novelty, and I believe in creativity being an emergence of novelty. But I think linking it to individuals, particularly creative geniuses, is a bit hierarchical in that sense. I think things are a lot more kind of networked, to use a term rather loosely, a bit more rhizomatic than those kind of branches off to some genius at the end. Because creativity itself is a thing that, is again like a mood, it's an atmosphere, it's a thing which people enjoy at the time, and it catches on and it has a contagion of its own. And tracing it back to individuals, that's where we disagree. I'm not disagreeing with the production of novelty at all.
Sylvie, Shakespeare, Mozart, are they one-off anomaly depending on their kind of essence, or are they the product of...
Well, when we talk about novelty and creativity, I always think about the reception of novelty and creativity. Right? How do you determine whether something is both original and of huge value artistically, etc.? Well, to some extent, you cannot just have a third-person test, right? Saying, oh, if the output could not have been expected at time t by audience A, then it is original. That's such a blunt, simplistic test for originality, because actually the eyes of the receivers matter, right? So for instance, if I have a toddler who does a little crazy dance, and it was totally unexpected, output not expected, does this count as an original creative act. Well, you could say, but then it's a very, very minimal understanding of originality that I don't find very interesting. The more interesting bits of originality are when there's a conjunction between novelty, unexpectedness, and challenging the expectations of your audience. So you have to have an understanding of the interpretive framework of the people who will receive your piece of art, or etc. And it's in that relationship, again, I'm trying to challenge here the individual versus environment thing, because it's the art of navigating that relationship that makes a truly great artist. So yes, you have to be able to come up with something new, right? But the receptivity, in that sense, sometimes Hannah Arendt is really misunderstood, I think, because at some point she does talk about creativity and novelty by highlighting the extent to which the work of the artist is dependent on le regard, the way it is received by the people around the artist. And so that to me is a really interesting way of also challenging the tension.
Victoria, do you agree? When we talk about things about creativity, genius, cultural movements, does it depend upon the receptivity, the audience? Shakespeare, for example, needed writing, he needed an Elizabethan society, or was it Elizabethan? Might have been. Yeah. Jamesian maybe, anyway, a bit of both. Does it depend upon that?
I mean, receptivity obviously sort of determines, I guess, whether the work survives on in this cultural network. Sure, again, from that sociological perspective. But I mean, you could do something creative or make a beautiful work of art that nobody ever sees. And as long as it's a faithful expression of your character and there's something in you in that work of art, then I would say it's beautiful and original. And so I think that for me, I just am not seeing things so much in this sociological calculation. I mean, who cares if there's an audience there to recognize what you do? But surely that maybe is how we perceive novelty as a culture, as a society. But for me, it's I'm talking about something that's, a metaphysical fact, an irreducible fact. And I don't know, I think that what is the artist who we recognize as a great artist? Well, what are they doing? I mean, they're pulling on some invisible thread. They're referring to this part of themselves that's sort of semi-transcendent with regard to the now, this inspiration, this hunt, this little scent, this little trail of an idea, of a feeling, of a thought. And then they're working it out and they're molding it, whether it's into painting or music, and it's sort of like the faithfulness to that thread, to that inspiration, which I think then forces itself upon you in the power of the work. And I think we are at risk here if we deny individuals and we do say, okay, well, maybe there's novelty, but still there's these combinatorial elements that are being put together in a new way, and that's really what a new artistic work is. I think that we're really risking, again, how do we define human creativity versus something like what the chatbots are doing, which is just taking the whole history of the written word as it's codified on the open internet and recombining those into new sentence structures. I mean, I think that the human case is more than that.
So if you want to, you can. Okay, well, you've got one applause.
clap.
So, would you consider Shakespeare to be a genius in the preliterate society? Or Mozart to be a genius in the pre-literate
Johnny, here you go with your counterfactuals.
It's getting to the point about the regard, isn't it?
Yeah, no, but I don't like that kind of reasoning. I don't like to think that way, because it's not possible. To me, I don't think it's very helpful. I mean, it might be a kind of helpful thought experiment, but yeah, would Shakespeare have been a genius in a pre-literate society? I don't know, maybe. But
the point, it gets to what Sylvia's saying, is that about how genius doesn't just depend upon your genius, it depends upon the regard, it depends upon the audience, the receptivity of it.
Yeah, I mean, listen, everything that you do is, again, not done in a vacuum, and there is obviously this inspiration that you're drawing from your own experience and from the world around you and from the others around you. But I don't think that admitting that fact, then you have to say, well, there's not a real individuality or a real genius that's then being exercised upon that environment and changing that environment around you. And I don't know. I think I would have a fairly kind of trad, I guess, view of human genius, where really there are these individuals who come along who change society and who open things up. I mean, how do you explain someone like St. Francis of Assisi coming along and pointing to love? changing the whole entire culture of European civilization and the church, and forever impacting our minds with this beautiful, simple, pure message of love. How do you explain something like that? It's just beautiful. Or Einstein discovering his theory of relativity, and I don't know, there are too many examples to count. And yeah, I don't know.
Do you want to respond to that, or should we move on to the next theme? Because it's a good one, and I'm conscious we're going to go to Q&A soon, but the last theme is about what happens when we feel like a zeitgeist, the cultural movement, the times of our age have become destructive. So Tony, what should we do as individuals, or what can we do if we feel as though the cultural movement is destructive, or the ideas of our times?
I'll segue that to the creative genius. If we replaced all these big arty figures and put the name Donald Trump in there, as someone, an originator of something, as part of a network of something. I read some interesting stuff because Donald believes in a lot of conspiracy theory, which is a problem of our age, particularly in...
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below.
With a free trial, you can enjoy the full talk and thousands more.
Thank you for being part of the conversation.